Marcus Chen sat in his dressing room at Carnegie Hall, looking at himself in the mirror. His black suit was perfect. His hair was neat. His hands were steady. In 30 minutes, he would walk onto the most famous stage in America and play piano for 3,000 people. The tickets had sold out in less than 2 hours. People paid hundreds of dollars just to hear him play. At 32 years old, Marcus was the best pianist in the world. Everyone said so. The newspapers wrote about him every week. Music magazines put his picture on their covers. Other pianists watched his videos online and tried to play like him. But they could never match his speed or his perfect timing. Marcus had been playing piano since he was 4 years old. His parents brought him to piano lessons every day after school. While other children played games or watched TV, Marcus practiced piano for 6 hours every day. He never complained. He loved the way his fingers moved across the keys. He loved the sounds he could make. By age 10, Marcus was winning every piano competition in his city. By 15, he was performing with famous orchestras. By 20, he had played in every major concert hall in America. Now at 32, he traveled around the world. People came from far away just to hear him play. The door to his dressing room opened. His manager, Robert, walked in with a big smile on his face. "Marcus, the hall is completely full," Robert said. "There are even people standing in the back. The critics from all the major newspapers are here tonight. This is going to be another perfect review." Marcus nodded but did not smile. Perfect reviews were normal for him now. He had not received a bad review in over 5 years. Critics always used the same words to describe his playing: flawless, perfect, amazing technique, no mistakes. Marcus knew they were right. He never made mistakes when he played. "What am I playing tonight?" Marcus asked, even though he already knew. "Chopin's Piano Concerto No. 1, then 3 solo pieces by Liszt, and you'll finish with Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, Robert answered. "The same program you've been playing for the past month." Marcus had played these pieces hundreds of times. He could play them with his eyes closed. He could play them while thinking about other things. The music came from his fingers automatically, like breathing. Every note was exactly where it should be. Every timing was perfect. "The orchestra is ready," Robert continued. "They're all excited to play with you again. The conductor said you're the only pianist who never needs extra practice time with them." This was true. When most pianists performed with orchestras, they needed many hours of practice together. They had to learn how to play at the same speed and stay together. But Marcus was so good that he could play perfectly with any orchestra on the first try. He always knew exactly when to start, when to play fast, and when to play slow. Marcus stood up and walked to the small piano in his dressing room. He played a few scales to warm up his fingers. Each note was clean and clear. His fingers moved like machines, fast and accurate. He played a difficult passage from the Chopin Concerto. It was a part that made most pianists nervous, but Marcus played it easily. "You know," Robert said, "I got a call today from the Vienna Philharmonic. They want you to record all of Beethoven's piano concertos with them next year. It would be the biggest recording project of your career." Marcus stopped playing and looked at Robert. Recording with the Vienna Philharmonic was something every classical musician dreamed about. They only worked with the very best musicians in the world. "Of course they want to work with me," Marcus said. "I'm the best pianist alive." Robert looked a little surprised by Marcus's confidence, but he did not say anything. Marcus often talked this way now. He knew how good he was, and he was not shy about saying it. The truth was that Marcus had started to feel bored with his success. Playing these concerts felt too easy now. He could perform the most difficult pieces without any stress or worry. Other pianists struggled with music that felt simple to him. Sometimes during concerts his mind would wander while his fingers played automatically. Last month Marcus had attended a concert by another famous pianist. The man was considered very good, but Marcus could hear every small mistake he made. The timing was slightly off in some places. A few notes were not as clean as they should be. Marcus had felt embarrassed for the man. How could someone play so poorly in front of an audience? After that concert, Marcus had dinner with several other musicians. They all praised the pianist's performance and said how wonderful it was. Marcus did not understand why they were so impressed by such ordinary playing. It made him realize how much better he was than everyone else. A young assistant knocked on the dressing room door. "Mr. Chen, 5 minutes until showtime." Marcus walked to the mirror one more time. He straightened his tie and looked at his hands. These hands had brought him fame and money. These hands could do things that no other hands in the world could do. Every finger moved exactly as he commanded. Every muscle was trained to perfection. "Are you ready?" Robert asked. Marcus smiled for the first time that evening. "I'm always ready." They walked through the hallways under Carnegie Hall toward the stage. Marcus could hear the orchestra tuning their instruments and the sound of 3,000 people talking and waiting for the show to begin. He felt the familiar excitement building inside him, but it was different now than when he was younger. When he was 20, his heart would beat fast before concerts. He would feel nervous and worried about making mistakes. Now he felt calm and confident. He knew exactly what would happen when he walked onto that stage. The stage manager gave Marcus the signal. The lights in the hall dimmed and the audience became quiet. Marcus walked onto the stage and 3,000 people began clapping loudly. He bowed to the audience, then sat down at the beautiful black grand piano. The conductor raised his baton. The orchestra began to play the opening of the Chopin concerto. Marcus listened carefully, counting the beats until it was time for him to join in. When his moment came, his fingers touched the keys, and the most beautiful piano sounds filled the hall. For the next 2 hours, Marcus played like a god. Every note was perfect. Every phrase was exactly right. The audience sat in complete silence, amazed by what they were hearing. When he finished each piece, they clapped and cheered so loudly that the sound echoed through the building. As Marcus took his final bow that night, he looked out at the standing audience. Their faces showed wonder and joy. He had given them something beautiful, something they would remember for the rest of their lives. But deep inside, Marcus felt empty. This had been too easy. There was no challenge left for him in the world of music. He was the best pianist alive, and he knew it. But for some reason, that knowledge did not make him as happy as it used to. 3 weeks after his Carnegie Hall performance, Marcus found himself in Prague, the beautiful capital city of the Czech Republic. He was there to perform with the Czech Philharmonic Orchestra at the Rudolfinum, one of Europe's most famous concert halls. The building was over 100 years old, with golden decorations and red velvet seats that had hosted the greatest musicians in history. Marcus had performed in Prague many times before. He loved the old city with its stone bridges and ancient churches. The people there understood classical music in a way that felt different from other places. They listened more carefully and appreciated the small details that most audiences missed. Tonight's concert had gone perfectly, as always. Marcus had played Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 23 and received a standing ovation that lasted for 10 minutes. The audience had called him back to the stage 4 times for extra bows. Now he was at the reception party in the grand lobby of the concert hall, wearing his black suit and holding a glass of expensive wine. Rich people and music lovers surrounded him, all wanting to shake his hand and tell him how wonderful his performance had been. A wealthy businessman wanted to hire him for a private party. A music teacher asked if he would consider giving lessons to her most talented student. A young woman asked for his autograph and told him she had traveled from Germany just to hear him play. Marcus smiled and said polite things to everyone, but his mind was somewhere else. He had played the Mozart concerto so many times that it felt like putting on an old pair of shoes. There were no surprises anymore. He knew exactly what each note would sound like before he played it. Even when the audience reacted with amazement, Marcus felt like he was just going through the motions. "Mr. Chen," said a well-dressed older man with gray hair, "I must tell you that your interpretation of Mozart tonight was extraordinary. I have been coming to this hall for 40 years and I have never heard anything quite like it." "Thank you," Marcus replied automatically. "Mozart is one of my favorite composers." This was not really true. Marcus did not have favorite composers anymore. All music had started to feel the same to him. Whether it was Mozart or Chopin or Beethoven, it was all just patterns of notes that his fingers knew how to play. The reception was in full swing when Marcus noticed something strange. Even with all the talking and laughing in the lobby, he could hear music coming from outside. It was faint, but it was definitely piano music. This was unusual because the Rudolfinum was located on a quiet street with no other music venues nearby. Marcus excused himself from a conversation with the concert hall director and walked toward the large windows that faced the street. The music was clearer now, and it was unlike anything he had ever heard before. It was not classical music, but it was not popular music either. It had a melody that seemed to tell a story, but Marcus could not understand what the story was about. "Excuse me," Marcus said to Robert, who was talking to a group of local music critics. "Do you hear that piano music outside?" Robert stopped talking and listened for a moment. "Oh, that's probably just a street musician. Prague has many of them, especially near the tourist areas." "But this is not a tourist area," Marcus said, "and that does not sound like typical street music." Robert shrugged. Well, maybe someone is practicing in one of the nearby buildings. But Marcus knew that was not right either. The music was definitely coming from the street, and it had a quality that did not sound like someone practicing. It sounded like a real performance, full of emotion and meaning. The melody continued, weaving in and out of the conversations in the lobby like a thread connecting everything together. Marcus found it hard to concentrate on what people were saying to him. The music outside seemed to be calling to him, pulling his attention away from the expensive wine and polite conversations. "I think I need some fresh air," Marcus told Robert. "But the reception will continue for another hour," Robert said. "There are still important people who want to meet you." "I will be back in a few minutes," Marcus said, already walking toward the exit. Marcus stepped outside into the cool Prague evening. The old city was beautiful at night, with warm light coming from the windows of ancient buildings and the sound of the river flowing nearby. But Marcus was not thinking about the scenery. He was following the sound of the piano music. The music was coming from around the corner where a small side street met the main road. Marcus walked slowly, not wanting to disturb whatever was happening. As he got closer, the melody became clearer and more beautiful. It was complex, but not in the way that classical music was complex. This music seemed to come from somewhere deep and real. When Marcus turned the corner, he stopped in complete surprise. There, on the sidewalk under a streetlight, was an old upright piano. It was not in good condition. The wood was scratched and faded, and some of the keys looked like they might stick. Next to the piano sat a small wooden box with a few coins in it. Playing the piano was an old man who looked like he might be homeless. His clothes were old and worn, and his hair was long and gray. His hands were weathered and rough, not smooth like Marcus's hands. But those hands were creating the most beautiful music Marcus had ever heard. The melody the man was playing seemed to contain every human emotion at once. It was sad but also hopeful. It was simple but also deep. It told a story without words, and even though Marcus could not understand the story, he felt it in his heart. Marcus stood quietly, not wanting to interrupt. He had heard thousands of pianists in his career, from students to world-famous performers. But he had never heard anyone play with this kind of emotional truth. The old man's technique was not perfect. Some notes were not perfectly clean and his timing was not precisely mathematical. But somehow this made the music more beautiful, not less. Other people walked by on the street, but most of them did not stop to listen. A few dropped coins in the box, but they kept walking. Marcus could not understand how they could hear this music and not be completely amazed by it. The melody continued for several more minutes. Marcus found himself holding his breath, afraid that any sound might break the spell. The music seemed to come from the old man's soul and flow through his fingers into the night air. It was the kind of music that made you remember things you had forgotten and feel things you thought you had lost. When the song finally ended, the old man looked up and saw Marcus standing there. Their eyes met for a moment, and Marcus felt like the man could see right into his heart. The man's face was kind but also wise, like someone who had lived through many difficult things but had not let them make him bitter. Marcus wanted to say something, but he did not know what words could possibly express what he had just experienced. He reached into his pocket and pulled out all the money he had with him, probably more than $200. He walked over and put it in the wooden box. "That was," Marcus began, but he could not find the right words. The old man smiled at him, a gentle smile that seemed to understand everything Marcus was feeling. But instead of saying anything, the man simply stood up, closed the piano, and began to push it away down the dark street. "Wait," Marcus called after him. "What was that song? Who composed it?" But the old man did not answer. He just kept pushing the old piano until he disappeared into the shadows between the buildings. Marcus stood alone under the streetlight, staring at the empty space where the piano had been. The melody was still playing in his head, but when he tried to remember exactly how it went, he found that he could not capture it. It was like trying to hold water in his hands. For the first time in many years, Marcus had heard music that was better than anything he could play. And for the first time in his life, he had no idea how to learn it. Marcus returned to his hotel room at the Grand Hotel Praha with his mind spinning. The luxury suite that usually made him feel important now seemed meaningless. The expensive furniture, the crystal chandelier, the view of Prague Castle from his window, none of it mattered. All he could think about was the mysterious melody he had heard on the street. He sat down at the beautiful grand piano in his suite, the same type of instrument he had mastered long ago. His fingers touched the keys, and he tried to play what he remembered from the old man's performance. But something was wrong. The notes that came from his fingers sounded empty and cold compared to what he had heard just an hour earlier. Marcus tried again, starting with what he thought was the opening phrase. His technique was perfect, as always. Every note was clean and precise. But the melody felt lifeless under his hands, like a copy of a painting that missed all the colors of the original. He stood up and walked around the room, humming what he could remember of the tune, but even his memory seemed to be failing him. The melody was slipping away like sand through his fingers. The more he tried to hold on to it, the more it seemed to disappear. Marcus had always been able to remember music perfectly. If he heard a piece once, he could play it back note for note. This was one of his greatest talents. Something that had impressed his teachers since he was a child. But this simple street song was somehow beyond his ability to capture. He sat back down at the piano and tried a different approach. Maybe if he started from the middle of the melody or from the end, he could work backwards to understand it. But every attempt felt wrong. His fingers knew how to play thousands of pieces by the greatest composers in history, but they could not find their way to this one simple song. Hours passed. Marcus did not notice the time. He usually went to bed early before concerts, but tonight sleep was impossible. The melody played over and over in his mind, but always just out of reach. It was like trying to remember a dream after waking up. The feeling was still there, but the details kept disappearing. At 3 a.m, Marcus was still at the piano. His fingers were tired and his back ached from sitting in the same position for so long, but he could not stop trying. This was the first time in years that he had encountered music he could not immediately understand and master. The hotel room felt too small. Marcus opened the windows and let the cool night air fill the room. Prague was quiet at this hour, with only the occasional sound of a car on the street below. He thought about the old homeless man and wondered where he was now. Was he sleeping under a bridge somewhere? Did he have a home to go to? Did he know how incredible his music was? Marcus tried to remember every detail of the encounter. The man's weathered hands, the scratched piano, the way the melody seemed to float in the air around them. There had been something magical about that moment, something that Marcus's perfect concerts had never achieved. As the sun began to rise over Prague, Marcus finally admitted defeat. He could not recreate the melody and he could not stop thinking about it. He had never experienced anything like this before. Music had always been something he controlled completely. Now, for the first time, music was controlling him. Marcus's phone rang at 8 a.m. It was Robert calling to confirm the schedule for the day. "Good morning, Marcus. How are you feeling? You left the reception quite early last night." "I'm fine," Marcus lied. He had not slept at all and he felt far from fine. "Great. We have that interview with Czech Radio at 10 o'clock, then lunch with the director of the Prague Spring Festival, and this evening you have the master class at the conservatory. After that, we fly to Vienna tomorrow morning for your next concert." Marcus had completely forgotten about these appointments. Usually, he kept his schedule perfectly organized in his mind, but today all he could think about was the mysterious melody. "Robert," Marcus said slowly, "what do you know about street musicians in Prague?" "Street musicians?" "Not much. Why do you ask?" "Last night I heard someone playing piano on the street. The music was unusual. I was wondering if you knew anything about the local music scene here." Robert laughed. "Marcus, you're one of the greatest pianists in the world. Why are you interested in street musicians? I'm sure whatever you heard was just some amateur playing for tips." But Robert was wrong and Marcus knew it. What he had heard was not amateur music. It was something far more advanced than that, but in a way that had nothing to do with technical skill. The interview at Czech Radio went badly. The journalist asked Marcus about his interpretation of Mozart from the previous night, but Marcus found it hard to concentrate on the questions. His mind kept wandering back to the street corner and the old man with the mysterious melody. "You seem distracted today, Mr. Chen," the journalist observed. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, of course," Marcus said quickly. "I'm just thinking about music." During lunch with the festival director, Marcus barely touched his food. The director was explaining plans for next year's festival and asking if Marcus would be interested in performing. But Marcus only heard half of what was being said. "We would love to have you play the complete Chopin ballads," the director was saying. "It would be the highlight of our season." "Yes, that sounds fine," Marcus replied automatically, even though he had not really been listening. The masterclass that evening was even worse. Marcus was supposed to work with advanced piano students from the Prague Conservatory, helping them improve their technique and interpretation. But when the first student played a Bach invention, Marcus found himself thinking about how different it sounded from the street musicians playing. "Your technique is very good," Marcus told the student, but he paused, not sure how to finish the sentence. Usually he would give specific advice about finger position or timing, but today, all he could think about was the emotional truth he had heard in the old man's music. "But what, Professor Chen?" the student asked eagerly. "But it needs more." Marcus struggled to find the right words. More heart. This was not the kind of advice Marcus usually gave. He was known for his focus on technical perfection, not emotional expression. The student looked confused, and so did the other people in the room. After the masterclass, Marcus walked alone through the old streets of Prague. He went back to the corner where he had heard the mysterious melody, hoping that the old man might be there again. But the street was empty except for a few late-night tourists taking pictures of the old buildings. Marcus stood under the same streetlight, where he had listened to the most beautiful music he had ever heard. The memory of it was still strong, but his ability to recreate it seemed hopeless. He had built his entire career on being able to learn and master any piece of music. Now he had found something that was beyond his reach, and it was driving him crazy. He returned to his hotel room and sat at the piano once more. This time, instead of trying to recreate the mysterious melody, he played one of his most famous pieces, a Chopin ballade that had made him famous years earlier. His fingers moved automatically through the familiar passages, playing with the same technical perfection that audiences loved. But tonight, the music sounded hollow to Marcus's ears. It was beautiful in a cold, mathematical way, but it lacked the warmth and humanity he had heard from the street musician. For the first time in his career, Marcus's own playing disappointed him. He closed the piano and looked out at the city of Prague spreading below his window. Somewhere out there was an old man who could create magic with his rough hands and a broken-down piano. And here was Marcus Chen, supposedly the best pianist in the world, unable to capture even a fragment of that magic. This realization scared him more than anything he had ever experienced in his life. Marcus was supposed to leave Prague the next morning for Vienna, but he could not bring himself to go. When Robert came to his hotel room to collect him for the trip to the airport, Marcus was still in his pajamas, staring out the window at the city below. "Marcus, what are you doing?" "Our flight leaves in 2 hours," Robert said, looking worried. "I'm not going to Vienna," Marcus said quietly. "What do you mean you're not going?" "You have a concert tomorrow night with the Vienna Symphony. This is one of the most important concerts of your tour." Marcus turned away from the window and looked at his manager. Robert had been working with him for 8 years and had never seen him cancel a performance or miss a flight. "Tell them I'm sick," Marcus said. "Tell them whatever you want. I'm staying in Prague." "Marcus, you can't be serious. The Vienna concert has been sold out for months. The critics will be there. This could hurt your reputation." But Marcus did not care about his reputation anymore. All he cared about was finding the old man and hearing that mysterious melody again. "I'll handle the Vienna situation," Robert said, pulling out his phone. "But this better be important, Marcus. What's going on?" Marcus tried to explain about the street musician and the melody that had changed everything for him. But as he talked, he could see that Robert did not understand. To Robert, Marcus was just having some kind of strange breakdown over a homeless person playing piano on the street. "Look, Marcus," Robert said when he finished explaining, "I know you're under a lot of pressure. Maybe you need a vacation, but canceling concerts is not the answer. Let's go to Vienna, do the show, and then we can take some time off." "No," Marcus said firmly. "I'm staying here until I find him." Robert argued for another 30 minutes, but Marcus would not change his mind. Finally, Robert left to catch the flight to Vienna and try to fix the disaster that Marcus's absence would create. As soon as Robert was gone, Marcus got dressed and went out into the streets of Prague. He started at the corner where he had first heard the mysterious melody, then began walking through the city systematically, looking for any sign of the old man or his piano. Prague was a large city with many neighborhoods, but Marcus was determined to search every street if necessary. He walked through the tourist areas around the old town square, where many street performers played for crowds of visitors. But none of them was the man he was looking for, and none of their music came close to what he had heard that night. Marcus approached other street musicians and asked if they knew anything about an old homeless man who played piano. Most of them spoke little English, but those who could understand him just shook their heads. A few said they had seen various people with keyboards or small pianos, but no one could give him any useful information. By evening, Marcus's feet hurt from walking all day, but he had learned nothing. He went to several homeless shelters and asked the workers if they knew about a man who played piano on the streets. Again, no one could help him. The next day, Marcus continued his search. He hired a taxi driver who spoke good English and asked him to drive around the city looking for street musicians. They spent hours driving through every neighborhood, but they found nothing. Maybe this man only plays at night, the taxi driver suggested. Many street performers work better when there are fewer police around. That evening, Marcus walked through the city again, this time focusing on the areas where he thought homeless people might sleep. He looked under bridges and parks and in the doorways of closed shops. But Prague was a big city, and searching randomly like this felt hopeless. On the third day, Marcus decided to try a different approach. He went to the main library in Prague and asked for help finding information about local folk music and traditional Czech melodies. Maybe the song he had heard was an old folk tune that he could find in a book or recording. The librarian was very helpful and showed Marcus several collections of Czech folk music. Marcus spent hours listening to recordings and looking through books of traditional songs. Some of the music was beautiful, but none of it sounded like what he had heard from the old man. Marcus also visited the Prague Conservatory and spoke with professors who specialized in Czech music history. He described the melody as best he could, humming fragments of what he remembered. The professors listened carefully but could not identify the song. "It sounds like it might be from the Moravian region," one professor suggested, "but I've never heard anything exactly like what you're describing." Marcus was becoming desperate. He put up posters around the city with his phone number, offering a large reward for information about the old pianist. He hired a private investigator who specialized in finding missing persons. He even contacted local television stations to see if they would help him search. The private investigator, a woman named Eva, was very professional and thorough. She interviewed dozens of street performers, homeless shelter workers, and police officers who worked in the areas where street musicians usually played. But after a week of investigation, she had found no trace of the old man. "It's like he just disappeared," Eva told Marcus during one of their meetings. "Are you sure you didn't dream this encounter?" Sometimes when people are very tired or stressed, they can have very vivid experiences that seem real. Marcus was sure he had not dreamed it. The memory of the melody was still strong in his mind, even if he could not recreate it on the piano. He knew what he had heard, and he knew it was real. Meanwhile, news of Marcus's canceled concerts was spreading through the classical music world. Robert called him every day, begging him to return to his normal schedule. Concert halls were demanding explanations. Music critics were writing articles wondering what had happened to the world's greatest pianist. "Marcus, this is getting out of control," Robert said during one phone call. "People are starting to think you've had a nervous breakdown. Your next 3 concerts have been canceled, and 2 recording projects have been put on hold. You're destroying your career." But Marcus could not think about his career. Every morning he woke up with the mysterious melody playing in his head. Every night he went to sleep frustrated by his inability to find its source. The song had become like a puzzle that he had to solve, even if it cost him everything else in his life. Marcus began visiting churches and asking priests if they knew about old musical traditions in Prague. He went to retirement homes and nursing facilities, thinking that maybe an elderly resident would recognize the melody. He contacted music therapy programs and rehabilitation centers, wondering if the old man might be getting help somewhere. Nothing worked. The old pianist seemed to have vanished completely from the city, as if he had never existed at all. After 2 weeks of searching, Marcus was exhausted and discouraged. He had spent thousands of dollars on investigators and rewards. He had walked hundreds of miles through the streets of Prague. He had spoken to hundreds of people, but he was no closer to finding the old man than he had been on the first day. Marcus sat in his hotel room, looking at all the information he had gathered. There were maps marking every place he had searched, lists of people he had interviewed, and recordings of folk music that might be similar to what he had heard, but none of it had led him to the answers he needed. For the first time since this obsession began, Marcus wondered if he was losing his mind. Maybe Robert was right. Maybe the stress of being perfect all the time had finally broken something inside him. Maybe he was chasing something that did not really exist. But then he would remember the feeling of hearing that melody for the first time. And he knew it had been real. Something had happened to him on that street corner that had changed everything. He just had to keep looking until he found the explanation. Marcus picked up his phone and called Eva, the private investigator. "I want to expand the search," he told her. "Maybe he's not from Prague. Maybe he was just visiting the city that night. Can you check the surrounding towns and villages?" Eva sighed on the other end of the phone. "Marcus, I think you need to consider the possibility that this man doesn't want to be found. Maybe he saw how much his music affected you and decided to disappear on purpose." This thought had not occurred to Marcus before, but now it made sense. Maybe the old man was wise enough to know that the mystery of his music was more powerful than any explanation could ever be. But even if that was true, Marcus could not give up his search. The melody had shown him something about music that he had never understood before, and he had to learn more about it, no matter what the cost. After 3 weeks in Prague with no success, Marcus finally returned to New York. His apartment on the Upper East Side felt strange and unfamiliar, like a place that belonged to someone else. The walls were covered with framed reviews of his concerts, awards from music competitions, and photographs of him performing with famous orchestras. But looking at these reminders of his success now made him feel empty. Robert was waiting for him at the apartment, along with a stack of angry letters from concert halls, disappointed music critics, and confused fans. The classical music world was buzzing with rumors about Marcus's sudden disappearance and canceled performances. "We need to do damage control," Robert said, as soon as Marcus walked through the door. "I've scheduled a comeback concert at Lincoln Center next week. It's Chopin's Ballad No. 1, one of your signature pieces. The critics will be there, and this is your chance to show everyone that you're back to normal." Marcus nodded without really listening. He walked to his beautiful Steinway grand piano, the same instrument where he had practiced for thousands of hours over the years. His fingers touched the keys and he began to play scales to warm up. But even these simple exercises felt different now. Every note reminded him of how much better the street musicians' playing had been. "Marcus, are you listening to me?" Robert asked. "This concert is crucial for your career. We need to make people forget about Prague and remember why you're the best pianist in the world." "Yes, fine," Marcus said absently. "Lincoln Center, Chopin, I understand." But Marcus did not really understand anything anymore. The mysterious melody was still playing in his head, fainter now but still there. Sometimes he would catch himself humming fragments of it, but he could never hold on to the complete song. The week passed quickly. Marcus practiced the Chopin Ballade every day, playing it perfectly as he had done hundreds of times before. His technique was still flawless. His timing was still precise. But something fundamental had changed in his relationship with music, and he could feel it in every note he played. The night of the comeback concert arrived. Lincoln Center was sold out, with critics from every major newspaper and magazine in attendance. Backstage, Marcus put on his formal black suit and tried to prepare mentally for the performance. But his mind kept wandering to that street corner in Prague and the old man's weathered hands creating magic on a broken piano. 5 minutes? "Mr. Chen," the stage manager announced. Marcus walked to the wings and listened to the audience settling into their seats. 3,000 people had come to hear him play, just as they had in Prague before everything changed. But tonight felt different. Tonight, Marcus was not sure he deserved their attention. The stage lights dimmed and Marcus walked out to the piano. The audience applauded warmly, showing their excitement to see him return after his mysterious absence. He sat down at the beautiful Steinway and adjusted the bench, going through the same pre-performance routine he had followed for years. The hall became completely quiet. Marcus placed his hands on the keys and began to play the opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1. The melody flowed from his fingers with perfect technique, each note clean and precise. This was one of his most famous pieces, something he could play in his sleep. But as he continued through the first section of the ballade, Marcus's mind began to wander. He found himself thinking about the mysterious melody from Prague, comparing it to the Chopin he was playing. The classical piece suddenly seemed cold and calculated compared to the warmth and humanity he had heard from the street musician. Marcus tried to focus on his performance, but the comparison would not leave his mind. Here he was, playing one of the most beautiful pieces in the classical repertoire, but it felt lifeless under his fingers. Where was the emotional truth that had made the old man's simple melody so powerful? Halfway through the ballade, in a passage that required delicate touch and perfect timing, Marcus's concentration completely broke. His mind filled with the memory of that night in Prague, the weathered hands, the broken piano, the melody that had contained more truth than anything he had ever played. His left hand, which was supposed to play a soft accompaniment, struck the keys too hard. The harsh sound echoed through the silent hall like a thunderclap. The audience, which had been listening in rapt attention, shifted nervously in their seats. Marcus stopped playing. He sat at the piano, his hands frozen above the keys, staring at the black and white pattern that had been his whole life. The silence in the hall was complete and terrible. 3,000 people waited for him to continue, but Marcus could not remember why he was there or what he was supposed to be doing. The mysterious melody from Prague filled his head, drowning out everything else. He could hear it more clearly now than he had in weeks, but he still could not play it. His hands, which could execute the most difficult classical pieces flawlessly, were powerless to recreate the simple song that had changed his life. Marcus stood up from the piano bench. The audience gasped, not understanding what was happening. In 20 years of professional performing, Marcus had never stopped in the middle of a piece. He had never even made a noticeable mistake during a concert. Without saying a word to the audience, Marcus walked off the stage. Backstage, the stage manager and several other theater employees rushed to him, asking if he was sick or needed medical attention. But Marcus pushed past them and kept walking. Out of the concert hall and into the New York night, Robert found him sitting on the steps of the Lincoln Center fountain, still wearing his formal concert clothes but looking completely lost. "Marcus, what just happened in there?" Robert asked, sitting down beside him. "The audience is still waiting. They think you had some kind of medical emergency." "I couldn't do it," Marcus said quietly. "I couldn't pretend anymore." "Pretend what?" "You were playing beautifully. That was just one small mistake. Everyone makes mistakes." But Marcus knew it was not about making mistakes. It was about the realization that his entire career had been built on technical perfection, without emotional truth. The mysterious melody had shown him what real music could be, and now everything else felt fake. The story of Marcus's breakdown at Lincoln Center spread quickly through the classical music world. Videos of him walking off stage appeared on social media. Music critics wrote articles analyzing what might have caused such a dramatic collapse. Some people speculated that he had suffered a nervous breakdown. Others wondered if he had developed a physical problem with his hands. Concert halls began canceling his upcoming performances. Recording companies put his projects on hold. Music schools that had invited him to give master classes withdrew their offers. In a matter of days, Marcus's reputation as the world's greatest pianist was replaced by concern about his mental health and professional reliability. Marcus spent the following weeks in his apartment, avoiding phone calls and ignoring the stack of mail that accumulated by his door. He sat at his piano every day, but instead of practicing classical pieces, he tried endlessly to recreate the mysterious melody from Prague. His attempts always failed, leaving him frustrated and more convinced than ever that he had lost something essential about his musical abilities. The apartment that had once felt like a shrine to his success now felt like a prison. The awards and newspaper clippings on the walls mocked him, reminding him of a time when music had seemed simple and controllable. Now he understood that real music was neither simple nor controllable, and this knowledge terrified him. Robert visited regularly, trying to convince Marcus to see a doctor or therapist. Music industry friends called to offer support and encouragement. But Marcus could not explain to any of them what had really happened. How could he tell them that hearing a homeless man play piano on a street corner had destroyed everything he thought he knew about music? Late at night, when the city was quiet, Marcus would sit at his piano and play scales and exercises, the basic building blocks of his technique. But even these simple patterns reminded him of how mechanical his approach to music had become. He had trained his fingers to move with precision and speed, but he had never learned to play with his heart. The mysterious melody continued to haunt him, always just beyond his reach. Sometimes he thought he was getting close to capturing it, but then it would slip away again like trying to hold water in his hands. He began to understand that this was not just about learning a new song. It was about learning a completely different way of understanding music itself. Marcus realized that his breakdown at Lincoln Center had not been a failure. It had been the first honest moment of his musical career. For the first time, he had admitted that perfect technique was not enough. Now he had to figure out what came next, even if it meant losing everything he had worked his entire life to achieve. 2 months after his breakdown at Lincoln Center, Marcus finally agreed to see a therapist. Dr. Sarah Williams was a kind woman in her 50s who specialized in helping artists and performers deal with career crises. Her office was quiet and comfortable, with soft lighting and chairs that encouraged honest conversation. "Tell me about what happened that night," Dr. Williams said during their first session. Marcus had told this story many times to Robert and to concerned friends, but he had never told it completely honestly. This time he decided to hold nothing back. He described the concert in Prague, the mysterious street musician, and the melody that had changed everything for him. "It sounds like this experience in Prague was very meaningful for you," Dr. Williams said when he finished. "But I'm curious about why it affected you so strongly. What was different about this man's music compared to other music you've heard?" Marcus thought carefully before answering. "It was real," he said finally. "Everything I play sounds perfect, but it doesn't sound real." "What do you mean by real?" "I don't know exactly. But when that old man played, it was like he was telling me something important about his life, about what it means to be human. When I play, I'm just showing off how well I can move my fingers." Dr. Williams nodded. "It sounds like you're discovering the difference between technical skill and emotional expression. Many artists go through this realization at some point in their careers." Over the following weeks, Marcus continued his therapy sessions. Dr. Williams helped him understand that his obsession with perfection had protected him from having to risk real emotional vulnerability in his music. Playing perfectly was safe. Playing with genuine feeling was dangerous because it meant exposing his true self to the audience. "When did you start focusing so much on technical perfection?" Dr. Williams asked during one session. Marcus thought back to his childhood. "I guess it was when I started winning competitions. My teachers always told me that mistakes were unacceptable. My parents were proud of me when I played perfectly and disappointed when I made errors. I learned that being perfect was the only way to be loved. And now you've discovered that perfection might not be the most important thing in music?" "Yes, but I don't know how to play any other way. I've been training my whole life to avoid mistakes and control every note. I don't know how to let go and just feel the music." Dr. Williams suggested that Marcus take a break from classical music and explore other musical traditions. "Maybe you need to learn about music that comes from a different place," she said. Music that was never meant to be perfect. This idea scared Marcus, but he knew she was right. He had spent his entire life in the world of classical music, where every note was written down and every performance was judged by how closely it matched the composer's intentions. Maybe it was time to discover music that came from somewhere else. Marcus started by visiting the New York Public Library and checking out recordings of folk music from around the world. He listened to blues singers from the American South, traditional songs from Ireland, tribal music from Africa, and work songs from various cultures. Much of this music was performed by people who had never had formal training, but it carried an emotional power that his classical performances had never achieved. He was particularly drawn to the blues. The singers often had rough, imperfect voices, and the guitar players sometimes hit wrong notes or played slightly out of tune. But there was a truth in their music that spoke directly to his heart. These musicians were singing about real experiences: poverty, heartbreak, struggle, and hope. Their imperfections made the music more human, not less. Marcus bought a simple acoustic guitar and started teaching himself to play basic chords. His fingers, which could execute the most difficult piano passages flawlessly, struggled with the simple movements required for guitar. But this struggle felt good. For the first time in years, he was a beginner again, learning something new without the pressure of having to be perfect. He also started reading about the lives of the musicians whose recordings he was studying. Many of them had grown up in poverty, faced discrimination, or struggled with personal tragedies. Their music was a way of surviving difficult circumstances, not a way of showing off their skills. Marcus realized that his own life had been remarkably easy. He had grown up in a wealthy family, attended the best schools, and achieved success at an early age. He had never experienced the kind of hardship that gave birth to the most powerful music. No wonder his playing had always felt empty. He had nothing real to express. This realization was both humbling and liberating. It explained why the homeless man's melody had affected him so deeply. That music had come from real experience, real struggle, real life. Marcus's music had come from practice rooms and competition stages, but this understanding also gave Marcus hope. If he could learn to connect with his own authentic experiences and emotions, maybe he could learn to play with the same truth he had heard on that street corner in Prague. Marcus started keeping a journal, writing about his feelings and experiences for the first time in his life. He had always been so focused on external achievements that he had never paid attention to his inner world. Now he discovered that he had feelings about many things: loneliness, fear, the pressure of always having to be perfect, the emptiness of his success. He also began to explore his relationship with his parents and his childhood. In therapy, he talked about how his parents had loved his musical ability more than they had loved him as a person. They had been proud when he won competitions and disappointed when he didn't. He had learned to equate his worth as a person with his ability to play piano perfectly. "No wonder I'm so afraid of making mistakes," Marcus told Dr. Williams. "I learned that mistakes meant I wasn't lovable. And now you're discovering that mistakes might actually be necessary for real artistic expression?" "Yes, but it's terrifying. If I'm not the perfect pianist, then who am I?" This was the question that Marcus had to answer. For 32 years, his identity had been completely tied to his musical ability. He was Marcus Chen, the world's greatest pianist. Without that title, he didn't know who he was supposed to be. Marcus started volunteering at a local community center, teaching basic piano lessons to children from low-income families. These kids couldn't afford private lessons or expensive instruments. They played on old out-of-tune pianos, and sometimes missed lessons because of family problems or work schedules. But their enthusiasm for music was pure and joyful in a way that Marcus had forgotten was possible. They didn't worry about playing perfectly. They just wanted to make beautiful sounds and express themselves. Watching them reminded Marcus of why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. Before competitions and critics and career pressure had complicated everything, one of his students was a 12-year-old girl named Maria, whose family had immigrated from El Salvador. She had experienced poverty and uncertainty that Marcus could barely imagine, but when she sat down at the piano, her playing was full of hope and determination. She made many technical mistakes, but her music was alive in a way that Marcus's perfect performances had never been. "Mr. Marcus," Maria said after one lesson, "why do you look so sad when you play? Music is supposed to make you happy." This simple question from a child hit Marcus harder than all the therapy sessions and self-analysis he had been doing. He realized that somewhere along the way, he had forgotten that music was supposed to bring joy, not just admiration. Marcus began to understand that his encounter with the street musician in Prague had been a gift, not a curse. It had shown him what was missing from his musical life and given him a chance to find something real. The mysterious melody had been a teacher, pointing him toward a different way of understanding music and himself. He still could not play that melody, and he probably never would. But he was beginning to see that learning the notes was not the point. The point was learning to play with the same honesty and vulnerability that had made the old man's music so powerful. For the first time since Prague, Marcus felt hopeful about his future. He didn't know what kind of musician he would become, but he knew it would be someone more honest than the person he had been before. Marcus disappeared from the public eye for almost 2 years. The classical music world gradually stopped talking about his breakdown and moved on to celebrating other pianists. Some critics wrote articles wondering if he would ever perform again. Others assumed his career was over and began referring to him in the past tense. But Marcus was not sitting idle during this time. He was rebuilding his entire relationship with music from the ground up, learning things that all his years of classical training had never taught him. He continued volunteering at the community center, but he also started working at a homeless shelter in Lower Manhattan. 3 nights a week, he helped serve meals and organize activities for people who had nowhere else to go. Many of the residents had mental illness, addiction problems, or had simply fallen on hard times. Their stories opened Marcus's eyes to kinds of human suffering he had never imagined. At the shelter, Marcus met a man named William, who had once been a successful jazz musician. William had lost everything to alcoholism and had been living on the streets for 5 years. His hands shook from years of drinking, and he could no longer play piano the way he used to. But sometimes, late at night, William would sit at the old upright piano in the shelter's common room and play fragments of jazz standards. "I used to be somebody," William told Marcus one evening. "I played with famous people. I made records, but I forgot what music was really about. I thought it was about impressing people and making money. When I lost all that, I thought I had lost everything. What is music really about?" Marcus asked. William smiled, his weathered face lighting up. "It's about telling the truth. About your pain, your joy, your hopes, your fears. Everything else is just decoration." William became Marcus's first real music teacher in many years. Not a teacher of technique or theory, but a teacher of honesty. William showed Marcus how to play simple melodies with genuine feeling, how to let silence speak as loudly as notes, and how to make music that came from the heart instead of the fingers. "You play too many notes," William told Marcus during one of their late-night sessions at the shelter. "You're trying to fill up every space with sound. But sometimes the most important thing is what you don't play." This was a revolutionary concept for Marcus. He had been trained to play every note that was written on the page, to fill every measure with precise sound. Learning to leave space, to let the music breathe, felt like learning a new language. Marcus also started studying with Elena Rodriguez, a folk musician who taught at a small music school in Brooklyn. Elena played guitar and sang traditional songs from Mexico and other Latin American countries. Her voice was not technically perfect. It was rough in places and sometimes cracked on high notes, but it carried the weight of generations of stories and struggles. "Classical music tries to be perfect," Elena told Marcus during their first lesson. "Folk music tries to be true. There's a big difference." Elena taught Marcus songs that had been passed down through families for generations, songs that were never written down but lived in people's memories and hearts. These songs changed slightly each time they were sung, adapted to the singer's voice and experiences. The idea that music could evolve and grow instead of being frozen in one perfect form was another revelation for Marcus. "Sing this song like it's your story," Elena would tell him. "What does it mean to you? How does it feel in your body?" Marcus had never thought about music as something that lived in his body. He had always approached it as a mental exercise, a puzzle to be solved with his brain and executed with his fingers. Learning to feel music physically, to let it move through him like breath or blood, was slow and difficult work. He also started taking dance classes, which seemed crazy to his classical musician friends but made perfect sense to Marcus. If music was about the whole body, not just the hands, then he needed to understand how his entire self could express rhythm and emotion. The dance teacher, a young woman named Jessica, taught modern dance to adults who had no previous experience. "Feel the music in your feet first," she told the class. "Let it travel up through your legs, your spine, your arms. Don't think about looking good. Think about being true to what you hear." These lessons were humbling for Marcus. He who had mastered the most difficult piano pieces ever written could barely manage simple dance movements, but the struggle was teaching him something important about letting go of control and trusting his body to respond naturally to music. Marcus also began a daily meditation practice, something he had never had time for during his busy concert career. Dr. Williams had suggested it as a way to become more aware of his inner emotional life. At first, sitting quietly for even 10 minutes felt impossible. His mind raced with worries about his career, memories of performances and fragments of melodies. But gradually, meditation taught him to observe his thoughts and feelings without trying to control them. This skill proved invaluable when he returned to the piano. Instead of forcing his hands to play predetermined patterns, He learned to listen to what wanted to emerge naturally from his fingers. The breakthrough came during his second year away from performing. Marcus was at the shelter late one night sitting alone at the old piano. Most of the residents were asleep, and the building was quiet except for the sounds of the city outside. He wasn't trying to practice or work on anything specific. He was just sitting with his hands on the keys, feeling grateful for all the things he had learned over the past months. Without thinking about it, Marcus began to play. But instead of playing a piece by Chopin or Bach, he let his fingers find their own path across the keys. The melody that emerged was simple and rough around the edges, but it came from somewhere deep inside him. It was his own song, expressing his own journey from arrogance to humility, from perfection to truth. For the first time since Prague, Marcus felt like he was really making music instead of just playing notes. The melody wasn't technically complicated, and it wasn't perfectly executed, but it was honest. It was his. Marcus began composing his own pieces, simple songs that expressed his experiences over the past 2 years. He wrote a melody for William, capturing the sadness and wisdom of a broken man who had found redemption through honesty. He wrote a song for Maria, the young student whose joy had reminded him why music mattered. He wrote a piece for the mysterious street musician in Prague, thanking him for the gift of humility. These compositions were not in the classical style that had made Marcus famous. They drew from blues, folk, jazz, and other traditions he had discovered during his journey. They were imperfect and sometimes experimental, but they were authentically his own. As his second year away from the concert stage came to an end, Marcus began to feel ready to share his music with audiences again. But he knew that his return would be very different from his previous career. He was no longer interested in proving he was the best pianist in the world. He was interested in using music to connect with people honestly and help them feel less alone. Robert, who had remained his manager despite everything, was excited but nervous when Marcus told him he was ready to perform again. "What kind of music are you planning to play?" Robert asked. "The classical repertoire that made you famous?" "Some classical pieces, but played differently," Marcus said. "And some of my own compositions. Music that comes from real experience. That's a big risk, Marcus. Audiences expect certain things from you. Are you sure you're ready to meet their expectations?" Marcus smiled. "I'm not interested in meeting their expectations anymore. I'm interested in exceeding them in ways they never imagined." The old Marcus had been afraid of disappointing audiences by making mistakes. The new Marcus was ready to surprise them by telling the truth. He understood now that real artistry required vulnerability, and vulnerability required the courage to be imperfect. He was finally ready to be both a great musician and a real human being at the same time. Marcus chose to make his comeback at a small venue in Brooklyn, not at Lincoln Center or Carnegie Hall. The Brooklyn Music Center seated only 200 people and was known for hosting experimental and independent artists. It was the kind of place the old Marcus would never have considered performing, but it felt perfect for what he wanted to do now. News of Marcus's return spread quickly through the classical music world, but many people were skeptical. Some critics wondered if he could still play at his former level after 2 years away. Others questioned why he would choose such a small venue for his comeback. A few suggested that his breakdown had permanently damaged his abilities, but Marcus wasn't worried about what the critics thought anymore. He had invited William from the homeless shelter, Elena, his folk music teacher, Maria and the other children from the community center, and Dr. Williams to be in the audience. These were the people who had helped him find his way back to real music, and their opinion mattered more than any newspaper review. The concert was scheduled for a Thursday evening in March. Marcus arrived early to spend time with the piano, a well-worn Steinway that had been donated to the music center years earlier. It wasn't in perfect condition. Some keys stuck slightly and the sound was warmer and less precise than the concert grands he was used to. But these imperfections felt like old friends now. As the audience filed in, Marcus could see familiar faces mixed with curious strangers. Robert sat in the front row, nervous but supportive. Several classical music critics had come to see if Marcus could reclaim his former glory. But there were also people who had never been to a classical concert before. Residents from the homeless shelter, students from the community center, and neighbors from the Brooklyn community, who were simply curious about this famous pianist who had chosen their small venue. Marcus walked onto the stage wearing a simple black shirt and pants, not the formal tails that classical pianists usually wore. The audience applauded politely, but he could sense their uncertainty. They weren't sure what to expect from someone who had once been called the greatest pianist alive, but had disappeared for 2 years after a very public breakdown. "Good evening," Marcus said, speaking directly to the audience instead of simply sitting down to play. This was something the old Marcus would never have done. Classical concerts traditionally began with music, not words. "Thank you for coming tonight. Before I play, I want to tell you about a conversation that changed my life." Marcus told the audience about his encounter with the homeless musician in Prague. He described the mysterious melody that had shown him the difference between technical perfection and emotional truth. He talked about his journey over the past 2 years, learning to approach music as a way of sharing authentic human experience rather than demonstrating superior skill. "Tonight, I'm going to play some pieces that you might recognize," Marcus continued. "But I'm going to play them the way I hear them now, not the way I used to. I'm also going to share some music I've written myself, songs that come from the experiences I've had since that night in Prague. Some of what you hear tonight might not be perfect in the traditional sense, but I promise it will be honest." Marcus sat down at the piano and began with one of his own compositions, the piece he had written for William. The melody was simple and bluesy, with spaces for silence that let each note breathe. His touch was gentler than it used to be, less focused on power and precision and more concerned with expressing the sadness and hope he had learned from his friend at the shelter. The audience listened with unusual attention. This was not what they had expected from Marcus Chen, but something about the honesty of the music drew them in. When the piece ended, the applause was warm and genuine, different from the formal appreciation that usually greeted classical performances. Next, Marcus played Bach's Goldberg variations, but his interpretation was unlike any recording he had made before. Where his old performances had been technically flawless but emotionally distant, this version was conversational and intimate. He played some passages more slowly than usual, letting the mathematics of Bach's composition reveal its emotional content. In other sections, he allowed small variations in timing that made the music feel alive and spontaneous. The critics in the audience were surprised by these liberties with the classical repertoire, but they couldn't deny that Marcus's playing was more moving than it had ever been. His technique was still extraordinary, but now it served the music instead of calling attention to itself. Marcus continued with the piece he had written for Maria, his young student from the community center. This composition mixed classical harmony with Latin rhythms that Elena had taught him. It was joyful and hopeful, capturing the resilience of a child who had faced hardship but refused to lose her love of music. As the evening progressed, Marcus shared more of his own compositions and reinterpreted classical pieces through his new understanding of what music could be. He played a version of Chopin's Ballade No. 1, the piece he had been unable to finish at Lincoln Center, but this time his interpretation emphasized the storytelling aspect of the music rather than its technical challenges. The most powerful moment of the evening came when Marcus played his tribute to the mysterious street musician from Prague. He had never been able to recreate the exact melody he had heard that night, but he had composed something that captured its spirit. The piece was simple and profound, mixing elements of folk music, blues, and classical composition. It spoke of loneliness and connection, of loss and discovery, of the humility that comes from recognizing something greater than yourself. As Marcus played this final composition, some people in the audience began to cry. They couldn't articulate exactly what they were feeling, but the music was touching something deep inside them. This was what the old Marcus's perfect performances had never been able to do. They had impressed audiences but never moved them to tears. When the concert ended, the audience gave Marcus a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. But this time the applause felt different from what he had received in his previous career. It wasn't just appreciation for technical skill or professional achievement. It was gratitude for an artist who had shared something real and vulnerable. After the concert, people lingered in the lobby to talk with Marcus. William from the homeless shelter shook his hand with tears in his eyes. "Now you're making music," he said simply. Maria hugged Marcus and told him his songs made her want to practice piano more. Dr. Williams smiled and said, I think you found what you were looking for. The critics who had attended wrote reviews that were puzzled but ultimately positive. They noted that Marcus's technique was still impressive, but they struggled to describe the transformation in his musical approach. Some wrote about his increased emotional expression. Others mentioned his willingness to take interpretive risks. A few admitted that they had been moved by his performance in ways they hadn't expected, but Marcus didn't need the critics' approval anymore. He knew that he had finally learned to make music the way the mysterious street musician had, from the heart, with honesty and vulnerability. He was no longer the greatest pianist alive in terms of technical perfection, but he had become something more important, a true musician. In the weeks following his comeback concert, Marcus received invitations to perform at venues around the world, but he was selective about accepting them, choosing places where he felt he could share his music authentically, rather than just impress audiences with his skill. He continued teaching at the community center and volunteering at the homeless shelter. He kept studying with Elena and taking lessons from William when his friend felt well enough to teach. He maintained his meditation practice and his therapy sessions, understanding that his growth as a musician was connected to his growth as a human being. Marcus never saw the homeless musician from Prague again, and he never learned to play that mysterious melody exactly as he had heard it, but he realized that this was the point. The old man's gift had not been a specific song but a way of approaching music and life with humility and openness. Sometimes, before his concerts, Marcus would dedicate his performance to a teacher I met in Prague. Audiences never understood this reference, but it reminded Marcus of the night that had changed everything. He had thought he was the best pianist alive, but a homeless man with a broken piano had shown him that greatness in music came not from perfection, but from the courage to be genuinely human. Marcus was no longer trying to be the best pianist in the world. He was trying to be the most honest musician he could be, and in learning that difference, he had found something far more valuable than fame or critical acclaim. He had found his authentic voice as an artist and as a person. The mysterious melody had done its work. It had humbled a man who thought he knew everything about music and taught him that the most important lessons could come from the most unexpected teachers. Marcus's breakdown had actually been a breakthrough, a necessary destruction of his false self that allowed his true artistic voice to emerge. Now, when Marcus played, audiences didn't just hear perfect technique.